Hello YouTube, this is a layout update for Matt Goodman. I think it's like maybe April the 17th, something like that. 2014. I'm going to talk about my staging drawer. It's going to go right along here, at least during this part of the video. And I'm in the process of mounting the actual drawer slides, which I'll talk about here more in a minute. The top is actually in pieces over on this side of the basement temporarily, right over here. Those I'll show in more detail later, but they came out really well. I ended up, to make sure I had a good strong fit from section to section, because this whole thing's going to be about 14.5 feet long. From one section of 1/2-inch plywood to the next, they all have at least some, well, there's only 2 joints, and one has about a 2-inch overlap, and the one that fits here, where there's going to be a dog bone, well, sort of, a slight turn to it, there's a good 1.5 foot overlap there, and I routed it halfway through, and it actually came out correct. I was somewhat surprised about that. We'll talk about that more when I get around to building it. But along here are the drawer slides. So I mentioned on one of the Rail Radio podcasts that I was mounting it on a 30-degree angle, and you can see right here. Let me get my calibrated pointer back. Did a little shaky hand cam. Certain people that we know like that aesthetic. Not really. So it's a 30-degree angle because in this area right here, there's going to be somewhat a largish short peninsula, if that makes sense, kind of wide and not so deep, maybe about here. That's going to be where the turntable and roundhouse for the engine facility are. That's the intention. And the reason for this angle slide is because the layout is going to be, the staging drawer is going to be in here, which is going to be partly under the roundhouse area. So I wanted to make sure that all the switches and whatnot that are on the staging drawer are fully exposed. So by allowing the drawer to slide out at an angle here, that's going to move it from this point out to this point by the time it's done. So it moves it about, well, what, maybe about 1.5 feet to the left as it comes out. So this one's mounted right now. I have the soft close slides on this right now. I'm not sure if those are going to work out because while they do close very nicely, let me do this here, just give it a little push. It gets sucked in there really nice and slow. That's very nice. But the offside of that is that soft close is done by way of a spring, which is beneath that cover. And to pull this thing out, you have to kind of give it a pretty good yank. It makes it very difficult since I don't have a handle on it yet. And what I'm afraid is going to happen is once that spring lets go, it's going to shoot out, and all the cars on the drawer slide are going to fall over. But I do like the way it shuts. Do this again here from a different angle. Sorry about the shake. Just grabs hold and sucks it in real nice. This staging drawer kind of came as a late addition. I realized that I needed some staging room, and the only place I had was beneath what's going to be the engine facility up here. So I've talked about that before. The trouble with the staging drawer is that in order to get enough clearance as possible beneath the main level, that required a lot of changes in how I was going to do things. For one, no more spline down here. This is going to be on the staging drawer is going to be on 1/2-inch plywood with 1/2-inch homeless wood on top of that. And then there will be some about 7.5, 8 inches of clearance before I get to the bottom of the yard above. So right now I'm working on getting these things mounted. The leveling isn't too difficult, although I've made it more so. Initially I mounted these things at a height that made sense to me, which was more or less even with the top of this piece of wood here, and just level it front to back. Well, that's too high. That ended up with the drawer slides a good strong 1/4 inch above maybe a little more above the benchwork. And I needed all the help I can get, and Dad's design called for about an 1/8 inch differential, and here's an example of that. Maybe a little hard to tell, but it is much lower. And that one is in its final location. You can see that's just barely above the benchwork itself. So So that's the idea. And so since I had those mounted too high to begin with, that means I have to come back through here and start lowering these things. And in order to lower them and use the level, I had to, in some cases permanently, some cases temporarily, mount the drawer slide so that it would poke above the surrounding benchwork, so the levels could span the various cross braces. Initially had the laser level turned on. This is my reference line here. And that was good for setting the initial one, although it occurred to me later that these 4-foot levels, of which I have 2, partly by accident, are actually going to be a more expedient way to get this done. So now I'm pulling these screws out. These are the screws that mount the abutment, for lack of a better term, in the back. It's currently clamped on there. So I'm going to loosen this up, knock this down until I see a level on the bubble. And then I'm good on the front. Do the same thing on the back. Check again on the front. And I'll probably also end up replacing those back cleats with thicker ones so that I have more purchase area, especially in areas like this. I had to cut this joist to make it fit the corner well, but that also means there's not much bearing on this plate down here. And the last thing I wanted to mention about this, I was going to mention earlier and I got distracted, is that part of getting this staging drawer as low as I wanted it to be was required cutting these notches. And this got me a little concerned because that basically makes a 1x4 into effectively 1x2 dimensional piece of lumber. And given that there will be cases where when this drawer slides out there's going to be a fair amount of weight right here, I'm going to go back and strengthen that. And to that end, today I found a nice scrap metal shop and picked up a couple of sections of 1.5 by 2-inch, 8-inch thick aluminum, and that will go on the bottom edge of the benchwork to give it some of that support back that it lost with those notches. So that's one of those things you have to deal with when you plan something after the fact. Something a little off topic, but that's kind of amused me as I've gone through this building process, is how a standard, air quotes, standard design has evolved. This section right here is the oldest. Let me get a pointer here again. Next section here is the oldest remaining piece. I've changed my building practices as I went along. This one actually was initially mounted straight to the wall. It was, right now I have this bracket back here. This was mounted straight to this piece of wood here, which is mounted to the wall. My brother came by one day and said, you know what you got to do so you don't have to worry about drilling accurately into concrete is just go ahead and put up one piece of 1x4 and make that your mounting, what do I call it, just an area to mount the rest of the benchwork. So basically from this point forward I did it that way, and other room entirely is done that way. But here I had to basically, I mentioned this on one of the mailing lists, had to remove this entire piece and one's further down there as well, back it off, leave this guy mounted to the wall, and then put a new back plate on to the module here, and then fasten that to this piece of wood. So that gives me the luxury of being able to move up and down, but taking this module completely off if I wanted to. Now that all said, this, one of the things I learned as I went along, this actually started out quite a bit higher, up to here. And Dad came by one day and said, you know what, make sure you have enough room for terrain. You have to lower this about 4 inches. That's what I did. So I basically just screwed on this 1x4, sorry about the camera work there, screwed on this 1x4 directly on the bottom of the existing wood. There's a word there I'm trying to look for, I can't get it. And then lowered the entire benchwork down, did that all the way around the basement. So it was kind of fun. As I moved along, I had this great idea to use 1x3s for the back part of the module. Bad idea, just because it gives you less purchase area for attaching things, and as I found out when putting these cleats on for the drawer slides, in some cases there just wasn't enough room. So that was a bad idea. Screwing the cross braces directly into the back of the wood is done in most of these cases, like in the front you can see. I think that's a good idea for the main part of the module, here down to there and in. Middle ones, bad idea. As soon as you do that, you're going to have a reason to move your cross brace. Like in this case, actually this one's okay, but this one would have been nice to fiddle things around. Probably a bad example because that's an end piece. This module here was one of the last two I built, so this used all my then common standard, newest standard practices, which is to build a 4 foot by 2 foot module. Actually, this is 4 foot, let's see, 47¼ inches long. That allows a 3/4 inch space between this and the next one. So basically, a space and the module is 4 feet. So center line, or better stated, as my dad talked about it, center line of the leg, then the center line of the next leg is 4 feet. And this was the last module that went up. This had to fit space to allow access to the water meters, and plus the layout's going to be curving into these tunnels here anyway, so I didn't need any support to go any further down. But as you walk through this, you kind of go back in time with construction standards, which is amusing in hindsight and probably a good teaching lesson for some young buck once I become old. Okay, that's it for the bench work. Now we're going to talk about lights. Actually, scratch that. We're not going to talk about the lights yet. We're going to talk about the ceiling. This is actually the biggest change. Is my last update was the ceiling paint. This is actually a medium gray color, and when I first talked to the painter, I talked about having this painted black, and I've been to a few layouts and a few just regular basements in which the ceilings were painted black, and it was very effective. I guess I should be clear about one thing, is I wanted to keep the open joist space because that gives easy access to things like plumbing and other mechanicals, like more plumbing and all this wiring. Most of this wiring has been put in since I moved into the house, and of course it would have been very difficult if I had a drop ceiling. I had considered putting, because this is kind of a low ceiling, this ceiling, by the way, is 1.1 barbelés high, which is a new standard unit of measure internationally, otherwise known as 81 inches. So I initially wanted black. Painters had said that might be a little bit too oppressive given the relatively low height. Oh yeah, I was mentioning I was thinking about putting a drop ceiling basically fastened straight to the joists. And if I'd done that, I probably would have made it white to get more reflection. But because I wanted to mainly keep access to the joist space, I decided to leave that off, and also made the construction simpler. And then decided for a dark color on the paint. And the reason for the dark color, and somebody asked me about this, why I didn't use white, or if I considered white, is that joist spaces are inherently dirty. You get in the corners here, you're going to have cobwebs and dust working its way down through the subflooring and so forth. And I think on a white space, the ones I have seen, open joist spaces that have a light color, I think it's very noticeable. I also think that things with a lot of contrast, like these shadowed areas here between the subflooring, I think those stand out more when it's lighter color as well. And the whole idea is to try to draw attention away from the ceiling, not towards it. So that's why I chose the darker color. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the reason for the fairly light dark color was to have my painter's advice to make sure it didn't feel like it was too oppressive hanging over my head. And I think it was a good choice. And if you look around the basement, it's further away you look, the darker it looks. Except when it dries, it just gets the glare from the fluorescent. There we go. So that's fairly difficult to see that ceiling, especially when you look down at the lighter backdrop and such. The most recent project, other than the work I've been doing on the drawer slide, is the lighting on this end. These are LED lights. These are intended to be retrofits for in-ceiling can lights. And the local lighting guy, when I described what I wanted and wanted to keep kind of an open space, he kind of thought about it, scratched his chin, and said, you gotta try something by just get a nice simple fixture and hang it off a J-box. So I tried that out, and my wife and I are happy with that. It's kind of creepy and it looks like eyeballs, but other than that, it's pretty decent. And the light color itself is rated at 3000 Kelvin, and you can kind of see the difference when you look at that versus this side. It looks much bluer down here. All right, let me do this. I'll back up here, and once you get into the fluorescent area, you see the relative difference in colors. It looks much, much warmer down there. 3000 is, actually I wanted something like 3500 Kelvin. I've mentioned several times that I was very much influenced by Gary Cornwell talking about lighting and Model Rail Radio podcast number 25. That one's called Let There Be Light. And he recommended using a warmer color because it brings out the reds better. And we have lots, at least especially in the steam era, have a lot of red things, cabooses and boxcars, and I think that that's good advice, and I think it does work very well, or seems to. These lights down here, what are left of them, these are cheapy shop lights, and they're slowly dying over the past 10 years or so. These are mostly, I think all the rest of the ones remaining are all 6,000, 6,500 or 5,000 Kelvin. If you look over on this side, get a whole mix of things. Back there, workbench area, that's 3,500 Kelvin T8 fluorescence. These pigtail lights is compact fluorescence. These are usually rated about 2,700. So that one and this one's not on right there, and that guy are 2,700. So 35, 27, and this is probably 5,000, I'm guessing. And so this is kind of fits in between the two. It's a little bit whiter than compact fluorescent, but a little bit yellower than that. So that's the color I'm shooting for down there. I think that's it for the updates. I'll continue working on getting the rest of these drawer slides put in place, and hopefully that'll be done by the end of the weekend. Probably not because of Easter coming up. Have a good holiday, guys, and give another update soon.